Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into the fascinating, sometimes kind of daunting world of Roman architecture.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
It really is. And if you're anything like me, just the sheer scale, the time periods, all the different cultures involved, it can feel like a bit much sometimes.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive is specifically for you, the learner,
Yeah.
so we can pull out the really important, the most interesting bits from our sources.
Without getting totally swamped.
Right. We want you to get the key insights without feeling overwhelmed.
Okay, so we've got these excerpts here from an academic text on Roman architecture. And our mission basically is to get a handle on the main characteristics, the big innovations, what really shaped Roman
And
building.
we're going to try and make it feel accessible, maybe even surprisingly interesting.
Hopefully. So, ready to dig into the foundations, where do we start?
Let's go right back. Republican Rome. You really can't grasp the architecture without first thinking about where Rome actually is, its location.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Even Cicero was impressed by it, wasn't he? Close to the coast, but not too close. And the Tiber River.
Exactly. That balance is key. You've got security being inland, but the river gives you easy access to the sea for trade, for connection.
And communication within Italy, right? Plus those hills, Palatine, Capitoline, natural defenses built right in. Pretty smart planning from day one.
Very smart. And if you look at the earliest buildings, the Etruscan influence is just, well, it's everywhere, especially temples.
Right. They weren't like Greek temples, were they? Always up on that high platform, the podium.
Yes, and a really strong focus on the front entrance. Often just one main room, the cella, maybe columns, but usually just at the front porch, the pronios.
Sometimes three cellae side by side, like for Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva.
That too, and the more elaborate ones.
Yeah.
And a big chunk of the structure was that columned porch.
Thinking about that huge Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, built by the last Etruscan king right before he got kicked out around 5 or 9 BC.
Massive thing. 3 cellae, colonnaded wings. We still have bits of the podium, those tufa blocks. Shows you the scale.
And that raised platform idea, that really stuck, didn't it? It came straight from the Etruscans.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just temples. Early Roman houses, also based on Etruscan designs.
What about public spaces back then?
Early on, you had things like the Curia Hostilia, the first Senate house, and the Comedium, which seems to have been this circular assembly space, maybe with steps.
Okay. And then there's the less glamorous stuff, but vital defenses. The Servian Wall.
Ah, yes. Even though we know now it wasn't actually built by Servius Tullius, it's later, made from that Grata Oscura tufa.
But still a massive project, right? 11 kilometers long.
Huge. Mostly following the hills, but where it was vulnerable, like on the Esquiline Hill, they built this enormous earth rampart, the Agger.
With stone walls and a ditch.
The big ditch.
Yeah.
That uniform block construction, it tells you something about their organization, their engineering skills, even early on.
Yeah, that centralized effort is key for their expansion later.
Definitely shows early capability. But then, as Rome expands and bumps into the Greek world more, you start seeing Hellenistic styles creeping in.
Like in late Republican temples.
Exactly. Look at the Temple of Hercules at Korios, maybe around 100 BC. It still has the high podium, that Italo-Etruscan layout.
But the columns look different.
Yeah. They're Hellenistic Doric, more slender, fluted shafts, a lighter entablature that beam across the top. It's a real mix.
Fascinating blend. And that happened with theaters too, right? This mixing of styles.
It seems so.
Yeah.
Theaters in Sicily from the 3rd century BC, like at Segesta, probably influenced the ones built in Campania in the 2nd century BC.
How so? What features?
Well, they often had 3 doors in the stage backdrop, the scani fronds, decorated with half columns over 2 levels, but still with that really high stage you see in Hellenistic theaters.
Okay. Like in Pompeii, maybe?
Places like Pompeii, Sarno, Bovianum, Vetus, yeah. But then in Pompeii, after it became a Roman colony under Sulla, they actually modified the theater.
Lowered the stage.
Lowered the stage, vaulted the entrances to the orchestra area. That's really the beginning of the shift towards the standard Roman theater type.
Right, right. Okay, let's shift gears. Everyday life, shopping. Where did Romans actually buy stuff?
The basic unit was the taberna. Just a single room, opens wide onto the street, often with a little mezzanine level above for storage or living.
And you could find anything there.
Pretty much. Bakeries, fish shops, sometimes processing the fish right there. Wine and oil cellars with those big dolia jars set into the counter, fooleries for cleaning clothes.
Where would you find these shops?
Often lined up facing the forum or taking up the ground floor of houses or apartment blocks, the insulae.
Were there like Early shopping malls?
Sort of. You see early organized areas like at Ferentium shops opening off a barrel-vaulted market hall. A barrel vault is like a tunnel roof, a continuous arch.
Ah.
And as towns got prouder, fancier, you see a move towards enclosed markets, Michela, especially for meat and fish. Nero built the big one, the Macellum Magnum. Pompeii had them too.
But the ultimate shopping complex has to be Trajan's markets, right? Behind his forum.
Oh, absolutely. Multi-level covered market hall, maybe 150 shops and offices.
Yeah.
It's incredibly sophisticated. A planned commercial center.
Like an ancient mall. Yeah. Amazing. And what about baths? The thermae, they evolved too.
Definitely. The earliest big public ones, like Agrippa's or Nero's, we don't have much left of them. But Nero's baths might have pioneered things like double circulation heating systems.
But Titus's baths give us a clearer picture.
Yes. Much smaller than later imperial ones, but you see that classic symmetrical layout. The axial sequence, hot room, caldarium, warm room, tepidarium, cold room, frigidarium, and the exercise yards, the palaestrae.
Okay, so we've seen the Etruscan roots, the Greek influence, the development of public spaces. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. How did they build all this stuff? The engineering, the materials?
Right. And you can't talk Roman building without talking about two absolute game changers. The arch and concrete.
Couldn't have done the big stuff without them, could they? Like that bridge at Alcantara or the Segovia Aqueduct. Just wouldn't be possible.
Not on that scale. And think about their bridges. They were smart about avoiding piers right in the middle of the river where the current could wash them away, the scour effect.
How did they design the abutments, the ends?
They were shaped to reduce turbulence. Narrow end facing the current, kind of tapered upstream. Quite aerodynamic or hydrodynamic, really.
Clever. And the aqueducts. Just incredible. Carrying water for miles.
Across valleys on bridges like the Ponte Gard, spectacular. Or over roads like the Porta Maggiore in Rome.
And how did they distribute the water once it got to town?
Through distribution tanks, Castella Aquae. And places like Pompeii had water towers with lead pipes, seemingly set up so public fountains got water last if supplies ran low, prioritizing the basics.
Smart. Now, concrete. Roman concrete wasn't quite like ours today, was it?
No, it evolved. Seems to have started down in Campania with mortared rubble. Early Pompeii used rubble fill inside Sarno limestone frameworks, held together with clay.
But then they improved the mortar.
Exactly. By the 3rd century BC, they figured out using pozzolana, that black volcanic ash with lime, made a really strong mortar.
Right.
Strong enough to ditch the limestone framework.
And in Rome itself?
They used a strong mortar mixed with aggregate, small stones, called cimenta, made incredibly tough walls. That's why so much survives.
And the outside layer, the facing, that changed too.
Yes, several types. Opus incertum is the early one. Irregular small stones, kind of a patchwork effect.
In that net-like pattern.
Opus reticulatum, small square stones laid diagonally. And later, opus testaceum, facing with bricks or tiles, became really common from Nero's time onwards. Gave a smoother finish.
When did these actually come in? Has the dating changed?
Yeah, it's been refined. Opus incertum seems older than we used to think, maybe late 3rd century BC, like in the Porticus Aemilia.
And reticulatum.
Might also be earlier, maybe late 2nd century BC. Some think its spread in Rome was linked to needing faster, more standardized building methods. As the city grew rapidly, kind of an industrialization of building during the Gracchi period, maybe. That early example might be Pompeii's theater complex.
Interesting. And bricks they used baked and unbaked?
Yep, coctus for baked, crudus for unbaked, sun-dried ones. They even had standard sizes, the Lydian system. And they cut bricks into special shapes, vessels, sesquipedales, bipedales for arches and vaults.
Speaking of vaults, what kinds did they master?
The basic one is the barrel vault, a continuous semicircular arch, like a tunnel.
We mentioned that with the market hall.
Right. Then the cross vault, where 2 barrel vaults intersect at right angles. That opens up the space more, allows windows.
And the cloister vault.
That's where intersecting barrel vaults meet over a square space, like in the tabularium in Rome, the old records office.
Building these huge concrete things must have been tricky, though. Foundations, support walls, scaffolding must have been immense.
Huge challenges, especially the weight. They got very clever about reducing the weight of concrete in domes,
Wow.
using lighter materials like pumice in the upper parts. The Pantheon dome does that near the oculus, the opening at the top. The dome also gets thinner as it goes up.
Did they use other tricks, like internal ribs?
Possibly. We see evidence of ribbing or cellular construction. Sometimes they even embedded empty amphorae, wine jars, into the concrete mix just to lighten the load.
Wow. So concrete was king, but they still used stone and marble, right?
Oh, definitely. Both for structure and for looks. Early on, softer volcanic stones like Peperino, easy to carve,
Yeah.
but weathered badly. Gabion stone was better, lighter but denser, even fire-resistant.
And tufa?
Lots of tufa. Grata Oscura type was popular in the Republic. Later, under Augustus, the finer Anio tufa came into fashion. Capellaccio was an early, low-quality one, mostly for foundations.
And marble. Fancy stuff.
The ultimate status symbol. The first all-marble temple in Rome was Jupiter Stator, 146 BC. At first, it was mostly imported by rich individuals.
But Augustus changed that.
Big time. Opening up the Carrara quarries made marble much more common in Rome. It became the look of the empire. They also used colorful breccias, like pavonazzetto, for decoration.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to Augustus. A really pivotal time for Roman architecture, wasn't it?
Absolutely a turning point. You said earlier it was a fusion, and it was. But under Augustus, it really matures, moves away from just raw engineering mixed with Hellenistic bits.
Towards something more distinctly Roman. Grand, classical.
Exactly. His reign was long, over 40 years. And he oversaw this massive rebuilding program in Rome, claimed he found a city of brick and left it one of marble.
Which probably attracted a lot of skilled workers from elsewhere, Greek craftsmen.
Almost certainly. Greek influence, both classical from centuries before, and the more recent Hellenistic style becomes really central to Augustan art and architecture. It looks like he deliberately aimed for that Greek ideal after maybe some early
You
experimenting.
can see it in sculptures like the Prima Porta Augustus, right? Echoing Greek statues.
Absolutely, echoing Polycletus's Doryphorus. And all the Greek copies found decorating villas. His own forum, the Forum Augustum, is a prime example of this new Augustan classicism.
How so? The layout.
Well, the layout rectangular space, colonnaded porticos around three sides, temple on the fourth, actually a place that owes a lot to Julius Caesar's forum next door.
But the details were Greek-inspired.
The carving, especially the Corinthian capitals, almost certainly done by Greek artisans. Interestingly, though, while it looks symmetrical in the Italic tradition, they apparently had trouble buying all the land, so it wasn't perfectly symmetrical.
Cleverly disguised, though.
Very cleverly. And that massive wall around it made of peperino.
Yeah, what was that for?
Partly visual separation, but also a practical fire break. Kept the Grand Forum separate from the less desirable Subura district behind it.
Smart. And the temples built under Augustus are really important for style, right? Defining the Roman orders.
Yes. This is when they really nail down the composite order that Roman invention, mixing Ionic volutes, scrolls with Corinthian acanthusleaves. And they standardized the Roman Corinthian order too.
How does that compare to earlier Roman Corinthian, like at Tivoli?
Good example, the Temple of Vesta at Tivoli. That's still used in Ionic entablature the bit above the columns. Under Augustus, they develop a more consistent, orthodox Roman Corinthian style, and the modillion becomes standard.
The modillion, what's that?
It's that decorative bracket under the projecting edge of the cornice. It was around in Hellenistic building, but Augustus makes it a regular feature of the Roman Corinthian order.
Okay, so the Augustan Forum itself, what key buildings were in there?
You had the Temple of Deified Julius, built right where Caesar was cremated, had a distinctive semicircular recess and altar.
And the speaker's platform? The rostra.
Right in front, decorated with bronze ship prows captured from Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. A very direct visual link between Augustus' victory and Republican tradition.
There's an arch, too.
The Arch of Augustus. First one put up in 29 BC, later replaced by a bigger triple arch celebrating the return of the standards lost to the Parthians.
How did it compare to later arches?
It was a bit different. Only the central opening was a proper arch. The side ones were more like niches with frames, edicules. Nearby were marble panels listing all the Roman consuls, the Fasta Consulares again, emphasizing continuity with the Republic.
What other big Augustan projects should we know about?
The Temple of Castor and Pollux, very ornate. The Temple of Concord, which had an unusual plan. The main room, the cella, was wider than it was deep.
And outside the Forum?
The Theater of Marcellus is key. That facade with tiers of columns, Doric on the bottom, Ionic in the middle, probably Corinthian on top. That design directly anticipates the Colosseum.
Wow, even repurposing older spaces.
Yeah, the Circus Flaminius, an older entertainment area, seems to have become more of a public square under Augustus.
So we've talked big projects, styles, but who are the actual people designing and building this? The architects?
Good question. We know they worked in different ways, some for the army, some in civil service, on public works, others in private practice.
Where did they come from? Were they Roman?
Often Greek, actually. Or sometimes freedmen, formerly enslaved people who'd gained skills and freedom. Pliny the Younger mentions this. And thankfully, we have Vitruvius.
Ah, Vitruvius's book on architecture, written around 23 BC.
Exactly. It's invaluable. Tells us so much about their training, what they needed to know.
Like what? Just drawing.
Drawing was crucial plans, elevations, side views, even perspective drawings. He talks about making colored renderings to show clients, but also surveying, understanding shadows, seaography, and critically costing projects. It was a broad skill set.
Do any of their actual drawings survive?
Very few, sadly. Some fragments on marble or mosaics, like that fascinating mosaic plan of a Bath building in the Capitoline Museum.
And what can we learn from those?
They show drawing conventions, solid lines for walls, symbols for doors, windows that are actually still recognizable today. It's quite amazing.
And their tools? Anything fancy?
Pretty basic, actually, and familiar. Dividers, folding rulers, calipers for measuring curves, plumb bobs for vertical lines. A whole set was found in Pompeii.
Wow. Did they have assistants?
Definitely. Assistants would draw out detailed profiles for moldings and things. Sometimes you find these templates scratched right onto the marble blocks being used on site, like at Pergamon.
And for the huge imperial projects, one architect couldn't manage that alone.
No way. A chief architect would have had a large staff. Think about Frontinus managing Rome's water supply. He lists engineers, architects, assistants, secretaries, even pipe makers. It gives you an idea of the organization needed.
Okay, so after Augustus dies, we enter the Julio-Claudian period, his immediate successors. Did the focus of architecture change?
It seems to shift, yeah. A bit less emphasis on those big public monuments with rows of columns.
And more on.
Lavish private residences for the emperors themselves, often in dramatic, slightly isolated spots.
Like Tiberius's place on Capri, Villa Jovis.
Exactly. Perched right on top of a cliff. A real challenge to build. They needed huge concrete water cisterns underground, massive concrete substructures just to create level platforms.
So a renewed focus on concrete, but for stability and function in tricky locations.
Precisely. It shows them using concrete in really sophisticated ways. Again, not just as filler.
And then there was Caligula, a bit eccentric.
Yeah. His short reign had some pretty wild architectural follies. Those floating bridge things on Lake Nemi, for example. Less practical, more showing off.
What about Claudius? He seemed more traditional, interested in history.
He was, but architecturally, his period saw some interesting things. Use of heavily rusticated stone, that rough, unfinished look like on the Porta Maggiore gate in Rome.
But also practical stuff.
Yes, vital engineering work. Developing the harbor at Ostia, building new aqueducts, keeping Rome running.
But the really big shift comes under Nero, right? Especially after the Great Fire in AD 64.
Absolutely revolutionary. The fire destroyed huge swaths of Rome. The rebuilding effort afterwards, using mostly brick-faced concrete and new, stricter fire safety codes, it changed the face of the city.
Wider streets, fireproof materials.
Yes, and mandatory water tanks in courtyards. But architecturally, the real game changer was Nero's own palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House.
Infamous, but groundbreaking.
Architecturally, yes. Forget its reputation for a moment. It was a radical departure. It used concrete not just for vaults, but to actively shape interior space.
What do you mean?
Curved walls, apses, hidden niches, soaring domes, playing with light from hidden sources. It was about creating dynamic, surprising interiors in a way Roman architecture hadn't really done before.
The historian Ward Perkins called it a shift from solids to voids.
Exactly. Focusing on shaping the space inside, not just the solid structure. This new architecture under Nero really paved the way for a lot of later developments.
Before the Golden House, Nero also started the Domus Transitoria, right? Linking the Palatine and Esquiline.
Yes, the passageway house. And Tiberius before him had started the first proper imperial palace complex on the Palatine, the Domus Tiberiana, much bigger and grander than Augustus's relatively modest house, setting a new scale.
And the Golden House itself was vast, covered a huge area.
Estimated 50 hectares. Included that artificial lake where the Colosseum now stands. We don't have much of the above-ground parts left, but the bits excavated under Trajan's baths on the Esquiline.
They show revolutionary stuff.
Amazing painted decoration, innovative architectural forms, often looking like those elaborate stage sets you see in Pompeian wall paintings.
And the rebuilding of Rome after the fire, wider streets, brick-faced concrete, it must have looked completely different. Maybe like Ostia gives us a clue.
That's a good comparison. The tall apartment blocks in Ostia, brick-faced concrete, barrel-vaulted rooms, internal courtyards, wide paved streets that probably reflects Nero's vision for the rebuilt Rome. A huge change from the old city of narrow, winding alleys.
Okay, let's step into that time capsule now. Pompeii and Ostia, two towns preserved by disaster.
An absolute tragedy for the people, of course. Vesuvius erupting in AD 79, Pompeii and Stabiae buried under ash and pumice, Herculaneum under volcanic mud flows.
But for us, an unparalleled snapshot of Roman life.
Exactly. Preserved in incredible detail. Architecture, decorations, everyday objects.
And Pompeii was just lost for centuries, wasn't it? Just a local legend of the city.
Largely forgotten until the 18th century. Then excavations started, sometimes more like treasure hunting at first.
But it got more systematic. Weber's plans, Fiorelli's plaster casts.
Yes, Weber documented buildings meticulously. And Fiorelli's idea of pouring plaster into the voids left by decayed bodies and furniture was genius. Gave us those haunting human forms. Maioriti did huge amounts of work there in the 20th century, too.
Has our understanding of Pompeii changed recently? Size? Population?
A bit. It looks like the city might not have completely filled its old defensive walls, suggesting the population was maybe closer to 10,000, not quite as large as sometimes thought.
What about the earliest houses there, like the House of the Surgeon?
Good example. 4th, 3rd century BC. Classic atrium house plan. Plain outside walls of Sarno limestone. Inside walls, often a limestone framework filled with rubble and clay.
But later, they got fancier. Suburban villas.
Oh, yes. 2nd century BC, Pompeii was thriving. Villas like the Villa of the Mysteries pop up, built on platforms, underground passages, cryptoporticus colonnaded gardens, peristyles, and those amazing Dionysian frescoes in the main room, the tablinum.
Even after it became a Roman colony under Sulla, after the social wars.
The old families eventually regained influence, and Latin became the main language. You see that reflected.
What about public buildings? The amphitheater.
One of the earliest stone ones in Italy, around 80 BC, cleverly used existing earth banks to support the seating. The theaters evolved, the Stabian baths show different building phases clearly.
And then the big earthquake in AD 62, that must have caused chaos.
Widespread damage. It seems they didn't start many massive new projects between then and the eruption in 79. The Temple of Vespasian, the central baths were exceptions, maybe still being finished.
But lots of repairs, redecorating.
It seems so. Lots of 4th-style wall painting dates from that period. And it reflects social shifts, too. The Temple of Isis was rebuilt by a freedman, showing their growing influence.
Okay, now Ostia. A different vibe from Pompeii. More functional.
Much more. It was Rome's main port. Bustling, commercial, lots of practical apartment blocks, insulae, warehouses, Heraea, loads of public baths for a transient population. It tells us a lot about later Roman urbanism and society.
Its location at the Tiber mouth was key, obviously. Was it always planned?
The early layout seems a bit haphazard. But around Sulla's time, early 1st century BC, they built new walls, expanded the area. By the late Republic, you see proper atrium-style houses, and part of the town gets replanned on a grid. The Forum developed too, with the Temple of Rome and Augustus at one end.
But the river harbor wasn't enough eventually.
No, ships got bigger, trade increased. Caesar planned a new harbor, but it was Claudius who actually started building it mid-1st century AD, a big artificial basin north of the river.
And Trajan expanded that.
Massively. Added a huge hexagonal inner basin further inland, surrounded by purpose-built concrete warehouses, the Heraea. Different design from earlier ones, often rooms back-to-back for more space.
So Trajan and Hadrian really shaped the Ostia we see today.
A lot of it, yes. Early 2nd century AD. Big areas were completely replanned and rebuilt under Hadrian. He also built a grand Capitolium temple at the north end of the Forum.
Were there height restrictions?
Apparently Trajan introduced a limit of 60 Roman feet, but Hadrian's Capitolium seems to have deliberately ignored that. Maybe a bit of imperial statement.
But Ostia eventually declined. Why?
Competition from the newer harbor at Portus nearby. Constantine transferred rights there in AD 314. Ostia hung on for a while, but by the 6th century it was largely abandoned. Malaria probably didn't help either.
Right. Okay, moving on to the Flavians, Vespasian and his sons, back in Rome after Nero.
And a very deliberate effort by Vespasian to give public space back to the people after Nero's private extravagance.
Symbolized most obviously by the Colosseum.
The Flavian Amphitheater, yeah. Built right on the side of the lake in Nero's Golden House. A massive statement, Tyrant's Pleasure Garden becomes public entertainment venue. And it was truly colossal. Solid foundations needed.
And managing the crowds must have been a nightmare? Or were they organized?
Incredibly organized. Separate entrances, clearly marked for different social classes. Emperor and officials had special access, even separate entrances for gladiators, and planned routes for removing bodies and dead animals. You needed a ticket. Very efficient circulation.
And that awning thing, the velarium.
Yeah, a huge system of fabric panels to provide shade. Must have been incredibly complex to operate, with ropes and masts all around the top.
What about underneath the arena floor?
A whole labyrinth down there.
Mm.
Storage, animal cages, machinery for special effects,
Hmm.
trapdoors, hinged platforms, pigmata for scenery or animals to appear suddenly. Real theater.
Vespasian's son Titus inaugurated it, right?
Mhm.
And built baths nearby.
Yes, the Baths of Titus. Not much survives above ground, but drawings by Palladio show the layout symmetrical, the usual caldarium, tepidarium, frigidarium sequence, flanked by exercise areas, palaestrae.
Smaller than later baths, but had all the main elements.
Pretty much a step up from earlier baths like the Stabian ones in Pompeii. Maybe even incorporated parts of Nero's baths that were already on that site.
Okay, the early 2nd century AD, Trajan and Hadrian, often seen as a high point, right?
Definitely a peak in terms of ambition, innovation, sophistication.
Trajan's Forum and Markets, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus.
Yes, a massive project north of Augustus's Forum. Domitian had started clearing the area, but the complex we see is Trajan's, finished early 2nd century.
And the markets are amazing, aren't they? Separate from the Forum itself.
Functionally separate, yeah, but architecturally incredible. That curved facade of shops, the big semi-domed halls at each end. Really ingenious engineering, built into the steep slope of the Quirinal Hill.
Multi-level light wells, like a proto-shopping mall.
Very much so. Around 150 shops and offices. A real hub.
Trajan was also big on infrastructure outside Rome. Roads.
Very much so. Repaired old roads like the Via Appia, built new ones like the Via Traiana to Brindisi in the south, marked by that great arch at Beneventum, keeping the empire connected.
Then Hadrian. Different personality. More consolidation, less expansion. Loved Greek culture.
All of that. He spent a huge amount of time traveling the provinces, absorbing different traditions, big admirer of Greece.
And his buildings reflect that. The Pantheon.
Well, Agrippa built the first temple there, but Hadrian's rebuilding gave us the Pantheon we know. That huge, awe-inspiring dome, totally unprecedented for a Roman temple interior.
And the porch hides the round bit behind.
Exactly. The big octa-style porch, 8 columns across, masks the giant rotunda. The structure of the drum supported the dome is incredibly complex. Piers, arches, relieving arches, masterful engineering.
Using lighter concrete higher up.
Yes, pumice near the oculus. Shows real understanding of materials.
And his villa at Tivoli. Huge and eclectic.
Massive complex. Incorporated an older villa, but added areas consciously evoking places in Greece and the East. The Canopus Canal, the Vale of Tempe, that mysterious moated island villa retreat. Very personal project.
Even the temple of deified Hadrian back in Rome, finished after his death, shows a slightly different style.
Yeah, the proportions are a bit unusual. The entablature style is different. Something maybe an architect from Asia Minor, maybe Pergamon was involved. A subtle break from the Augustan Roman standard.
Okay, let's take a trip around the empire now. Roman architecture wasn't just in Italy, North Africa.
Lepsis Magna is key. Birthplace of Emperor Septimius Severus. He poured money into it late 2nd, early 3rd century AD. New forum, basilica, colonnaded street, Infium fountain.
Really ornate, rivaling Rome.
Almost. Incredibly rich decoration, lots of sculpture, probably imported from Aphrodisias in Turkey. The basilica is amazing, apses at both ends. And the earlier honey baths there are interesting too, using concrete to shape the outside look, not just relying on columns and pediments.
And elsewhere in North Africa, El Jem.
Thisdris, modern El Jem in Tunisia, has that incredibly well-preserved amphitheater, clearly influenced by the Colosseum, built probably around AD 238, and aqueducts everywhere. Hadrian's one supplying Carthage was 80 kilometers long. Amazing engineering continued.
What about Europe? Gaul? France?
Romanized quite thoroughly after Caesar. Lots of colonies, prosperity under Augustus. You get classic examples like the Maison Carrée in Meme, beautiful Augustan temple. And the Pont du Gard, of course, that stunning aqueduct bridge.
Porton, London.
Londinium became a major port, provincial capital, had a big forum, basilica, law court meeting hall, governor's palace. Later got a city wall, even found a Mithraeum, Temple to Mithras.
Other towns. Verulamium.
Here's St. Albans. Started as a native center, became a planned Roman town, grid streets. Timber buildings gradually replaced by stone ones, including a theater. Eboracum, York started as a legionary fort, became a major military base, later a colonia. Severus died there.
Germany. Mostly frontier defense.
Yeah, the Rhine and Danube frontier was crucial. Lots of forts, initially timber, later rebuilt in stone. Places like Nijmegen, Xanten, Mainz, Regensburg.
Austria. Norcom.
Magdalensburg was an interesting one. Celtic settlement that became a big Roman trading town before declining when the Romans founded Verunum nearby.
Okay, finally, the eastern provinces. Strong Greek tradition there already. How did Roman architecture interact with that?
It's often a blend. In Athens, there wasn't much space for huge new Roman projects within the old city. The Agora of Caesar and Augustus used conservative Doric style, but also Hellenistic